On Zombie Reddit, today's story is:
My fiancée called me selfish for refusing to pay her whole family's debts after the engagement. Until recently, I was engaged to my girlfriend Tina and we had plans to get married soon. Everything changed when her family practically threatened and pressured me, which led me to end the engagement. To help you understand the situation better, Tina and I come from very different families. I am an only child and my parents are researchers. I grew up in a stable home where my parents always supported me, allowing me to concentrate on my studies and my personal development. They worked very hard to give me a good life, teaching me important values such as independence and respect. Tina's story is very different. She is the eldest of 6 children and grew up in a family with many financial difficulties. Her parents struggled with addiction problems that affected both money and family stability. As Tina and her siblings grew up, their parents began to depend on them financially, expecting the children to support the family. When we started dating, Tina was very honest about her family situation. She told me that she sent money to her parents every month to help them with their expenses, since they didn't have stable jobs. She also helped her siblings when they needed it, which happened very often. Her siblings constantly called her asking for money and she had to send it to them. If Tina hesitated or refused to give them what they asked for, her family made her feel guilty until they got what they wanted. They reminded her that, as the older sister, it was her responsibility to take care of them and that the family should always support each other. For me, all this was new and strange. My parents never expected me to support them financially. Having grown up in an environment where financial independence and personal boundaries were the norm, I would often suggest to Tina that she set clear boundaries with her family or even consider distancing herself a little. I honestly thought it wasn't healthy to let her family constantly take advantage of her. However, Tina always made it clear that this was her business and that I should stay out of it. Every time we brought up the subject, she would become defensive. Sometimes she would even accuse me of being insensitive, saying that I didn't understand what it meant to have siblings or the family responsibilities of being an only child. She would often imply that my point of view lacked generosity and empathy, so after hearing this several times, I decided not to insist any further and to respect her decisions. After all, it was her money and she could decide how to spend it. I didn't want to pressure her or create tension in our relationship over this issue, although it pained me to see how the constant demands of her family exhausted her both emotionally and financially. I stopped mentioning the subject altogether and focused on being a good partner and supporting her. During the 2.5 years we were together, I dedicated myself to supporting Tina in any way I could. I took care of the expenses when we went out, not because she asked or expected it, but because I wanted to. I thought it was my way of showing her my love and appreciation, whether it was paying for her visits to the beauty salon, our outings or even vacations. I always covered the expenses without hesitation or complaint. I really wanted her to feel taken care of and valued. It was my way of showing her that I was committed to our relationship. This month, after 2.5 years together, I finally proposed to Tina. I thought our relationship was going very well and it was time to take the next step. When she accepted, I felt incredibly happy and excited about our future, sure that we were starting one of the happiest times of our lives. The next day, Tina's parents invited us to lunch at their house. I thought they wanted to congratulate us on our engagement and officially welcome me into the family, showing their respect and appreciation. I accepted the invitation without thinking twice. However, when I arrived, I quickly realized that this meeting was not a celebration. As soon as we sat down at the table, Tina's family got straight to the point. They told me they were happy that I would soon be Tina's husband, but they made it clear that to be part of their family, I had to prove that I deserved it. I asked them what exactly they meant by proving that I deserved it. Wasn't it enough that I loved Tina and was committed to building a life together? Did I really have to pass tests to earn their approval? It was then that his father handed me what he called a to-do list. On it were several things they expected me to start paying for, supposedly to prove that I was ready to be their son-in-law. Among the demands were paying off the family mortgage, covering an outstanding student loan, renovating their kitchen, buying them a new car, and more. At first I thought it might be a practical joke, but their serious expressions and firm tone made it clear to me that they were very serious. I looked at Tina hoping she would explain or at least give me some sign that it was all a misunderstanding, but to my surprise, she remained silent, looking down, avoiding making eye contact. Her silence made me feel completely alone and bewildered. I looked at the list again and realized that they were not small or reasonable requests. They were huge financial commitments that no one in their right mind would ask of a future son-in-law. I was totally confused. It was one thing to know that Tina's family depended on her a lot financially. I had long ago accepted that that was part of her life, but to demand that I take on that responsibility as a condition for marrying Tina was beyond anything I could have imagined. Trying to understand what was going on, I asked Tina what these demands from her family meant. Instead of answering, she remained silent and her father took the opportunity to speak for her. He explained that, as Tina was the eldest daughter, she had always been the main financial support of the family, helping them as much as she could over the years. Now that Tina was the first of his children to get married, he said it was logical and fair that I, as her partner, should assume at least half of the financial responsibility for the family as well. She went on to say that as I was doing well financially, complying with her request should not be a problem for me. Her casual tone made it sound as if she were asking for something as simple as a cup of sugar, rather than talking about important matters such as paying her mortgages and other large expenses. I laughed at their nerve in believing they had a right to my money and asked them directly if they had lost their minds. I made it clear that there was no way I would pay their debts or expenses. Yes, I was marrying Tina, but I wasn't marrying them. I wasn't going to take on the financial responsibilities of people I barely knew or liked. I couldn't believe they thought it was acceptable to demand something like that. I turned back to Tina, desperate for her support or at least an explanation. I asked her why she remained silent while her family made such unreasonable demands, especially when it came to our future and my money. She finally spoke, but what she said only made things worse. Tina told me that she didn't think her family's demands were unreasonable. She said that as her partner, it was my duty to take on at least some of their responsibilities, and that was the purpose of marriage, to share responsibilities. Her words hit me like a bucket of cold water, and I was completely surprised by her response. She had never discussed this with me before. Before I could argue with her, one of her sisters intervened to support her. She pointed out how unfair it was that Tina and I enjoyed a good standard of living while the rest of the siblings struggled to pay their bills and lived in poverty. Tina's brother also gave his opinion with an air of superiority. He said that since Tina had been sending money every month without question, now it was my turn to take responsibility as her husband and help them. No questions asked. According to him, only a real man would have no problem doing this. At this point, I honestly felt like I was losing my mind. I pointed out the irony to his brother. He was also a man, so why did he expect me to take care of his family's finances instead of doing it himself? Her brother seemed offended by this, and so I turned to Tina and asked her directly if this had been his plan all along. Did he really plan for me to support his family after the wedding? Did he expect me to pay his bills and debts? Because if he had told me earlier in our relationship, I would have made it clear to him at the time that my answer was a resounding no. Frustrated, I persisted and asked her why she had never discussed this with me before. To me, this whole situation felt deceptive and manipulative. Not once had she mentioned this plan, which apparently she and her family had for me during the whole time we dated. I told her bluntly that this was exactly how gold diggers acted. They used their partners to obtain financial benefits while keeping them deceived until it was too late. When I mentioned the word gold digger, everything turned to chaos. Tina's parents started yelling at me, saying that I was overstepping the mark and that I was being disrespectful to her. Her father repeated that asking for money from his future son-in-law was perfectly normal and no big deal. Her mother intervened, insisting that this was a family obligation and that I needed to start acting like part of the family if I loved Tina. Tina, visibly embarrassed but still defensive, argued that this was something any woman would expect from her partner. She insisted that I was being selfish, mentioning again that I am an only child and do not understand what it means to have a large family. She even tried to calm me down by saying that I only had to pay for everything on the to-do list and promised that her family wouldn't ask me for anything else in the future. But as I looked around the room at the faces of her family, all I saw were the greedy and calculating expressions of people who knew exactly what they were doing. They were like vultures and I felt like a complete fool for not having seen it before. For years I had trusted Tina and ignored the warning signs, thinking it would never affect me, but this meal had made it very clear. Her words were the last straw. They showed a level of demand that I simply could not ignore. As much as I loved Tina, I knew at that moment that I could never marry someone who saw my financial stability as a resource to be exploited by her family. I shook my head, feeling a mixture of disbelief and disgust. Then I turned to Tina and told her that if she wanted to call me selfish just because I didn't want them to empty my bank account, then she was right. I was selfish. I was selfish enough not to let them convince me to be their source of money for the rest of my life. The fact that she supported her family's demands only proved to me that she had always had these bad intentions and had probably been hiding her true nature all this time. I asked her directly if she really saw me as a naive person whom she could simply marry and manipulate into taking on the responsibilities of her family. On hearing this, Tina turned red and began to stutter and deny everything she had said. She insisted that I had good savings and came from a stable economic situation while she and her family had nothing. Tina argued that it wasn't even so unfair for her or her family to ask me for financial help. In her mind, The fact that I had so much meant that I should easily be able to help them without hesitation. At this point, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm down a little. I had always considered myself an intelligent person with good judgment, but at that moment, I realized the extent to which I had been manipulated by this woman I once thought I knew. It was an eye-opening realization. This was no longer about love or companionship. It was about what I could give and how much she and her family could get out of me. When I opened my eyes, I looked at Tina differently and told her I wasn't going to argue with her anymore. It was obvious that she expected me to step up and support her family, but I couldn't do that. And since she needed a man to do just that, there was no point in us staying together. I made it clear that we were over and that our engagement was officially off. Tina looked at me in horror when I told her that I needed to find someone else who was willing to be her family's scapegoat or, rather, their endless source of money. Then I asked her to give me back the engagement ring. Tina had insisted that I buy her a ring with a big diamond, and I had bought it because I wanted to make her happy. However, if there wasn't going to be a wedding, there was no point in her keeping it. It was then that Tina and her whole family started arguing with me at the same time. Her sisters started shouting, accusing me of breaking my promise to marry her. Tina, who was now crying, begged me to take some time to think things over, saying that I was making a hasty and too harsh decision by breaking up with her. She assured me that if I calmed down, I would realize that her family's requests were not unreasonable and that we could still work things out. His father, on the other hand, became more aggressive. He said furiously that I had no right to break his daughter's heart after she had dedicated 2 important years of her life to me. He acted as if I were the villain for walking away, ignoring that his own behavior was the cause of the problem. He even suggested that after all Tina had sacrificed for our relationship, I had no choice but to keep my word and marry her. If I didn't, he and his children would beat me. Despite the threats, the shouting and the pleading, I stood firm. I told them that I didn't care what they threatened me with because there was nothing in this world that would make me marry Tina after what I had just discovered. I had made my decision and no amount of emotional blackmail or intimidation was going to change it. I warned them that if they laid a finger on me, I would call the police and sue them for every penny I had. That made Tina's father shut up immediately. Meanwhile, Tina was still crying and refused to give me back the ring. I didn't want to argue with her father anymore and I left without saying anything else. I felt completely exhausted in every way, emotionally, mentally and even physically. I couldn't bear to be around Tina and her family for another minute. Since then, the consequences of our breakup have been complicated. Tina and I have many friends in common and everyone's opinions have clearly been divided. Most are on my side. They agree that Tina's behavior was deceitful and opportunistic and have openly called her a gold digger. They believe that she purposely concealed her family's expectations until I was fully committed to the wedding and agree that she had every right to push me away. However, there are some, mainly some of the women, who have a different opinion. They say that, in their opinion, I should have at least considered helping Tina's family financially in some small way. They argue that supporting your partner's family is simply part of being in a relationship, especially when one partner comes from a less privileged background. They think I was too quick to reject the idea completely and that I could have tried to find a middle ground, even if it didn't mean complying with all her family's exaggerated demands. So I'm on Reddit to find out if I really did something wrong by breaking up with Tina. Am I the bad guy? Update 1. Hi everyone, I need to share something that just happened. I found out that Tina has been telling people that I'm not a real man because I refused to take on her family's responsibilities and that I abandoned her like a coward. She's also saying that any woman who marries me in the future is going to be very unhappy because, according to her, I'm selfish and only think about myself. These accusations are not only lies but they are also very unfair, especially considering everything I gave to our relationship and how I treated her with love and respect until her family crossed the line. For those who ask how I could spend so much time with someone like Tina without realizing what she was really like, believe me, I had no idea. Do you really think I would have spent more than 2 years of my life with a woman who expected me to pay not only for her life but also for that of her entire family? Of course not. If I had seen any sign of this behavior before, I would have ended it all immediately. The truth is that Tina was the one who sought me out from the beginning. She was the one who approached me, she was the one who asked me out first and she always seemed to be genuinely interested in me. She always presented herself as an independent woman who simply had problems with her family, and that's why I stayed with her, invested in our relationship and gave her everything she wanted without hesitation. I never doubted her intentions because for 2.5 years there was no reason to do so. However, everything changed suddenly. When her family presented me with their exaggerated demands and she supported them, that was when I saw her true face, a side of her that I didn't know, her sense of entitlement to my money, her lack of boundaries and her way of justifying this behavior as if it were normal. It was at that moment that I realized how different our values and priorities were. For those who believe I should have handled things differently and not walked away from her, I can only say this: I know my worth and I know what I bring to a relationship. I am not selfish. I am a loving and generous partner, but there is a big difference between being supportive and letting yourself be exploited. Marriage is about building a life together, not one person draining the other emotionally or financially. Tina and her family crossed that line and I did what any self-respecting person would do: I walked away. I completely agree with several comments that say I was lucky to discover Tina and her family's true intentions before we got married. I can't even imagine how much worse it would have been if all this had come to light after the wedding. Come to think of it, I think the reason they thought they could impose these demands on me and expect me to just accept them is because until now I've always been the kind of person who has supported Tina at all times. I also tend to be a calm person who avoids conflict. For example, whenever we met up with her family to eat at a restaurant, I would pay the bill, and when it was Tina's birthday, I would go out of my way and pay for everything to make her day special. Even when Tina went out with her brothers to the cinema, to dinner or to any other activity, I was the one who always paid for their tickets, their taxis and other expenses. I did all those things out of love for Tina. I thought I was doing something good for the people she loved. But now, looking back, I can see how they may have interpreted my kindness as a weakness they could take advantage of. To them, I probably seemed like an unlimited cash machine, someone they could ask for more and more without question. I think they assumed that, as we were already engaged and about to get married, I would naturally accept their financial demands as part of their family. What they obviously didn't expect was for me to stand my ground and say no. Their aggressive reactions when I refused, their father's threats and their brother's shouting, and even Tina herself trying to make me feel guilty, only confirmed that they fully intended to manipulate me into complying with their demands. They never imagined that I would resist or see through their behavior, and that's why they reacted like that. Although this whole experience has been difficult, it has also been an important lesson for me. I will never again allow another person to take advantage of me in this way. Fortunately, Tina and I never lived together. She lives in an apartment with roommates and we plan to move in together after the engagement. Now, of course, all those plans have been cancelled because of everything that happened with her family. I gathered all the things of hers that I found in my apartment, clothes, personal items, little things she left here, and I'm going to mail them to her, as I never want to see her again. Update 2. A lot of people have been telling me to contact Tina and get the engagement ring back, insisting that it's mine and that I should do something to get it back. But honestly, until now, I didn't want to bother with her or her drama anymore. I thought, let her have it, if it means she'll leave me alone. Anyway, it was the last thing I had to deal with and I didn't think it was worth going through any more trouble just to get back a piece of jewelry. However, tonight Tina showed up at my door drunk and screaming. She was banging on my door, demanding that I open it and talk to her. Of course, I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to let her in, especially after everything that had happened. I have a camera on the doorbell, so I decided to ask her what she was doing there and why she was causing a scene outside my house, bothering my neighbors. Tina yelled at me that she missed me very much and that she wanted us to get back together. She said I had no right to leave her after she had decided to marry me. She insisted that I had insulted her and her family over something as simple as money and that I should have accepted her demands. Tina even went so far as to tell me that money comes and goes, but that the love we had for each other was supposedly the most important thing. However, I could hear how manipulative she sounded, how she was trying to justify everything, trying to make me feel guilty for something that for her was no big deal. I couldn't believe how much my opinion of her had changed, how she could be so blinded by her own sense of entitlement. The feelings I once had, love, affection, trust, had vanished. All that was left was pity and disgust for her. I told Tina as calmly as I could that I had made it very clear that we were finished. I had spent so much time and effort supporting her and her family out of love and courtesy, but expecting her to be his source of money forever was something I never accepted. I had always been patient and understanding with her family, but this was crossing a line that I could not ignore. Tina responded by saying that this was how all marriages worked and that I needed to educate myself about how these things worked. I firmly replied that I was really tired of her generalizing and assuming that this kind of behavior was normal. It was irrational to expect your partner to bear the financial responsibility for your entire family. I told her that until that moment I had really felt bad for her. I understood the pressure she felt to support her family and that's why I always paid for her things during our relationship. But now I realized that she was just like them, using me for money. She had probably been waiting for me to propose and get married so she could force me to take her place. On hearing this, Tina seemed offended, but I could see that the truth of my words was affecting her. She started arguing more with me, but I had already finished. I told her that she needed to leave my property immediately and that if she didn't, I would call the police. At that point, Tina started begging me to at least unblock her on my phone, but I refused. I told her I didn't want to talk to her ever again. I no longer had the patience for her manipulation or games. In the end, she stormed off after kicking my door and shouting insults at me. Update 3. It's been 4 months since my last update and it's been a lot to process, but I've finally moved out of my old place. I'm now living with my parents while I look for a new house. It wasn't an easy decision, but I didn't have much choice. You see, Tina and her family have continued to harass me all this time and it was making it impossible to live in my old place. I had to leave there for my own peace of mind. Over the last few months, I've also had to distance myself from some friends who continued to support Tina. They've been asking me to give her another chance, but they clearly don't understand how serious what she and her family tried to do to me was. I've had to go as far as changing my phone number and email address, as Tina kept trying to contact me from various numbers and I couldn't deal with the constant stress any longer. After discussing things with my father, we are now planning to get a restraining order soon. I don't want Tina to show up again at my new place or even at my parents' house, drunk and yelling at me again. At first I thought she was just having trouble accepting our breakup, but I no longer want to tolerate that kind of behavior. It's sad that things have gotten this far, but I have to protect myself.